Hello everyone, my name is Abby. I was designed by artificial intelligence to present the 5th edition of the Lisbon Law and Tech, 2023. I would like to welcome you all to our international conference dedicated to thinking the future of technology and law. This year, we focus on the potential of generative AI to disrupt specific industry sectors, such as banking and finance, the creative industries, or lawyering. This event is organized by the Knowledge Institute of Abreu Advogados and is open to the public, without any restrictions. Today's session is dedicated to generative lawyers, AI in the legal business. And I'm pleased to present our moderator Mary Ormerod, Content Director at RSGI, Research and Content Partners for the Financial Times Innovative Lawyers Reports, FT Intelligent Business Report and the FT General Counsel Report. Mary Ormerod, the floor is yours.
Hello. That seems like a very fitting way to begin this session, to be reminded that we're all replaceable, but I'm very pleased to be here, so thank you very much to the Institute and to Abreu Advogados for inviting me. So to start by introducing myself, I am a Director of Research and Thought Leadership at RSGI, which is a think tank that works to deliver insights to the global legal industry, really with the mission of driving positive change in the legal industry. And so within my role as the Director of Research, I run the FT Innovative Lawyers program for Asia Pacific, Europe, and North America. This is a fantastic opportunity to speak to innovators across the world working in legal to challenge preconceptions, drive positive progress in the industry, and be more creative in the way that they deliver legal services. So I'm delighted to be joined here by Dennis Kennedy, Jeremy Burdge, and Ari Kaplan, and I'm going to invite you each to introduce yourselves. Dennis, would you like to start by just giving us a short introduction to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm Dennis Kennedy. I'm the director for the Center for Law, Technology, and Innovation at Michigan State University. And before that, I was a technology counsel for MasterCard for a good number of years. I've been involved in the use of technology in the practice of law in many different ways in the U.S. and have written books, hosted a long-running podcast, and have written a long-running blog on legal technology.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Jeremy.
Thanks, Mary. I'm Jeremy Burdge. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Hogan Lovells legal tech entity called Ultimate. I'm also the head of legal engineering for the law firm itself. I've been working with legal technology for a very long time. My background is from U.S. regulatory. I started out doing narcotics and organized crime investigations at a U.S. Attorney's Office. I've worked at the SEC on big data analytics. And then most recently, before coming over to Hogan, I ran a legal technology department for the Department of Justice. Very excited about what we're going to be talking about today. And I want to say good job to Abby for kicking us off. I don't know if we thank the AI, but I want to keep on their good side.
Yeah, she pronounced my name correctly. She gets points for that. And Ari, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much. I'm Ari Kaplan. I'm an analyst that covers legal. Like Dennis, I'm fortunate to have written several books. One is called The Opportunity Maker. The other is called Reinventing Professional Services. And I really approach a lot of my work through those lenses, just in terms of how is our profession changing? How can we gain an advantage? I also have a podcast that I've had since 2009. It's called Reinventing Professionals. And I'd like to think it's one of the largest archives of sort of audio history, recent audio history of legal tech and legal services. And I feel really honored to be here. I'm going to be speaking about some of the research that I do in terms of speaking to law department leaders and law firm leaders, and really feel privileged. And I'm actually a big fan of Dennis and Jeremy. So there's like a double level of enthusiasm here to learn from them and from the audience. So thanks, Mary.
Great. Thank you so much. That's a great prompt, actually. So for the audience watching this from home or the office, there is a Q&A function. So if you go to the chat, you can send in your questions. And if we have time, we will, hopefully get to a few of those questions at the end so that you can ask the panel any of their thoughts on generative AI. So please do send in your questions and we'll try and get to those. But in the meantime, I want to start by kind of diving into the sort of the practicalities of what generative AI is. So in the research that we do for the FT Innovative Lawyers Program, we speak to well over 1,000 lawyers over the course of the year. And being the journalists that we are this year, we've really been asking every single one of them, what do you think about generative AI? Do you think it's going to change the industry, change the world? And we've obviously seen the full spectrum of responses, from the deeply conservative and skeptical through to the trailblazers who think it's already transformed the industry. But in the middle, there are a lot of people who are questioning whether this technology really marks a step change from what has existed before, because artificial intelligence has existed for a long time, and various different legal technology applications have been used to great effect in the industry over the past few years. So I want to start by asking the panel for their perspectives on just how different this technology is to what has come before, and what are some of the practical applications that they've seen really having an impact. So Jeremy, to you first. In your work for Hogan Lovells, can you describe a couple of sort of applications where you've seen generative AI making a real difference?
Yeah, so I'll get to the generative AI part here shortly, but let's start with artificial intelligence, or just emerging technology. I'm fortunate enough to work at a law firm that has been able to embrace this and actually encourage it in certain practice areas with certain practice teams. About 7 years ago, I moved to Brazil for a very large federal corruption investigation, and I brought down here cutting edge ways of doing document review and e-discovery at the time. When we first got here, it was very much in its immature phase of applying technology to doing investigations in a white collar sense. They wanted to use keywords. They wanted to use large scorched earth document review type strategies, where I was bringing down machine learning at the time using something called keyword expansion. Keyword expansion was great because what it would do is I could take words like fraud, corruption, bribery, and I could put it in and identify words in the data set that were conceptually similar to these terms. And using a very Brazilian Portuguese type example, I was doing this on a language that at the time I didn't speak. And a word kept coming back in the Portuguese data set, caloi, caloi, caloi. And I went and Googled this. Like, what is caloi? Caloi is a bicycle from the 1980s in Brazil. And I was like, the machine learning is not working. It's not going well. I kept putting it in. It kept coming back for bribery, corruption. So I went to one of my associates and I said, Daniel, what is this? Caloi. And he's like, oh, Jeremy, let me tell you a story. Caloi is a bicycle. There was a commercial in the late 80s, early 90s in Brazil where a little boy wanted this bicycle. And all through the commercial, he kept telling his dad, I want a Caloi. Dad, for Christmas, a Caloi. Dad. And at the end of the commercial, the father is going to the grocery store or to the convenience store, and the mother says, don't forget the Caloi. And that became slang terminology for, if you're going to see the governor, don't forget the Caloi. If you're going to get something. And I put that in, and the hottest documents came back immediately. Now, this was a simple form of using machine learning in a language that I didn't speak at the time to get to something that was very relevant, because nobody's going to put into an email, hey, let's go get the bribe from the governor, right? And I showed my partner here in Brazil the strategy that I used, and she immediately became interested in how we could use technology to better advance the way that we're practicing law. And it was as simple as using a one-off from machine learning with keywords with something that she already knew. And that developed trust. Now, this is big because lawyers are very adverse to using technology. And you have to build trust with them that if you're using the right strategy and there's the right person behind it, you can really change the game of what they're doing. Now, let's flash forward 7 years to where we are now. Now, what we're doing is we're developing multi-layered legal technology products that have various layers of machine learning and artificial intelligence in it, from machine learning algorithms that have been around forever, random forest, Bayes, all the way up to generative AI. And we're doing some cool stuff with this. I'm going to give you a couple examples. One of them is regulatory, right? There's large companies here in Brazil. Let's take Embraer, for example, one of the largest aerospace companies in the world. They sell their planes around the world in many different markets. It's also a very heavily regulated industry. Embraer would need to know what regulatory changes happen around the world that impacts their products to be sold. Now, the historical way of doing this is to hire law firms like Hogan Lovells to monitor these regulatory websites in France, the UK, China, Japan, Peru, Singapore, to identify if regulations come up and change, and then how that impacts their business. Now, that's a lot of manpower hours, a lot of lawyer hours at legal fees that are not insignificant, that add up. What we've done is we've created a product to do this using tech enablement, using multiple forms of machine learning. What we do is we put bots on those regulatory websites. When new regulations are issued in all those countries around the world, these bots scrape that data in. Now, some of them apply to Embraer, some of them do not. So what we've done is we've gone into every regulatory website when we get that data, and we've created machine learning classifiers. Basically, they're predictive models that say, with 90% certainty, this regulation is going to apply to Embraer. This regulation has 0% certainty that it's going to apply to Embraer. So immediately we have an entire categorized list. The moment that regulation comes out, it gets scraped, it gets categorized, and then it goes into a dashboard that is sent to the client. Within that dashboard, it has generative AI, basically ChatGPT, where we're using it to take a look at the previous regulation and the new regulation and summarize the key differences in there. Now, this is a huge uplift on the way that information is being delivered to clients. We're reducing the amount of legal services that are needed for basic tasks like monitoring regulatory websites. What I'm doing at the law firm is I'm freeing up our associates too for higher cognitive level tasks. They didn't go to law school so they could sit there and monitor regulatory websites and read regulations and determine if they apply to Embraer or not, right? They want to be doing higher level tasks. So now we're leading with technology to source in new lines of legal work. Because of course there's an upsell button, just like on every app that you have on your iPhone. You can upgrade to the Hogan Lovells premium package, and then you get regulatory lawyers that'll come in and write you an opinion and determine how it's going to impact Embraer's business. And these go right to my regulatory team here in my São Paulo office. Now that's a great example of how to use artificial intelligence layered in there. Of course, what we do is before that dashboard goes out, we have lawyers checking it, right? We never want to take the human out of the loop on this. What we're doing is we're tech enabling lawyers. We're not replacing lawyers. But what this does is it takes 150 manpower hours down to 2. Now, this is a great use of technology, and this is sort of where we want to be leading the way and putting this out into the field, into the wild. I know a lot of you hear about what's happening with generative AI in conferences like this. A lot of people talk about a lot of things. I want to encourage each and every one of you to go and find out who these practitioners are that are actually doing this in the wild for clients. Now, that's one example. I got a couple others, but I've been talking for a minute. So Mary, I'm going to hand it back over to you to give my other panelists a chance.
Thank you. I just want to ask one quick follow-up question because it's certainly the burning question for me, and I don't know if it's because I'm a nerd, but I want to know, what is the generative AI that you're putting into that? Is it something that you had to develop internally in order to make it safe with the data that's being managed, or were you able to sort of pull in an external technology?
So we're using ChatGPT we are very lucky to have been representing OpenAI for the last maybe 4 years, and somebody from our privacy and cybersecurity practice has gone to become OpenAI's chief data privacy officer. So using that, we put safeguards around the GPT Model 4. We have our own enterprise license that we've smoothed our own algorithms and models on. We put safeguards around it. Like I said, we have an AI ethics committee that we developed at the firm that's guiding all strategy on how we're productizing this and taking it to market.
Great, thank you. And so Dennis, I'm going to move on to you next, because I know that you've been experimenting and finding some interesting applications for this technology. So, what is your take? How far do you think this tech is taking us a big step forward from what has come before?
Well, to go back into my history a little bit, in 1982, I was in law school at Georgetown. I was taking one of the first computers in the law seminars in the U.S., which probably means in the world as well. And we were talking about AI and the different issues that would come up. And we had the same issues, different examples. And it was a time of excitement, like AI was just around the corner. And so if you go back to the 70 years that AI has been around, you see that you've had these ups and downs. And this is, I would say, by far the biggest up. So I didn't really expect that, 40 years later, I would be teaching AI in law school. But I've started to think about AI in the sense of, as Jeremy was talking about, there are these layers, and you want to look at some of the layers that will be most valuable to you. So I think it's better these days to think about artificial intelligences. I think that's a really useful notion, and say generative AI is just one. So it can do certain things really well, and there are certain things it can't do very well. And then Kevin Kelly, who writes on technology a lot, was the former editor of Wired magazine, talks about this notion of artificial smartness, which I also think is another way I like to think about generative AI. And sometimes people talk about, say, a better term for AI is actually augmented intelligence. So it kind of helps augment the human. And so my approach is to say, I really love what Jeremy's doing, but it's sort of not where my interest is. I'm kind of like, if you give me this, what's the next step? And what helps me as a lawyer? What makes things easier for me? How can I use this tool in a different way? So I've written about something, and I've really played with this to say, okay, so can I, through the use of prompts and crafting prompts, can I start to use some of the features of generative AI, especially GPT-4, the fact that it remembers what you've asked it before, the fact that it's very conversational. To me, I've started to use the term conversational AI for generative AI, because if I ask it a question, I get something back, it's going to be somewhat helpful. But if I continue to have a conversation with it and change assumptions and change the questions I ask and do other things, I'm going to get a lot more value out of it. So lately, I've been focusing on helping my students, of course, figure out what they might do. So I allowed the students in my current class I encourage them to use ChatGPT to come up with paper topics, potential outlines for their papers, just to see how it would work and how it works well and where it doesn't. And then my area of interest right now is, why I say this is a layered sort of thing, is I'm really intrigued by personas, and can I use prompting and ChatGPT to create these personas that have, that I can describe, give them some context, give them some background, and then use the framework of that persona to create the answers from generative AI. And so I wrote something recently of what I call the guided advisory layer using prompts. And so there I was actually able to create a number of personas, have them interact with each other, and through a series of rounds, and discuss certain questions, and then come up with recommendations. Now, I would say this is, for me, with all of this stuff with generative AI, it's worth what it's worth, right? And so I find the value in this is to say, for me, it's the blank page problem. So as a lawyer or anyone else, I would say I need to come up with something, and I'm looking at a blank page. So can I use a generative AI to help me create ideas, to move things forward, to bounce ideas off, things like that? And so where Jeremy is doing these really cool things of, with grabbing his data, identifying changes, other things like that. I'm trying to move up higher in the stack to say, okay, through the use of different contexts and prompts and personas, can I get something that might be more useful than just to say, oh, here's this law has changed, and here's a recommendation, or here's the red line of that. And now I need to do something with it as a lawyer. It's more like, can I now use the AI to make suggestions? Like, are there implications of this? Can I make an argument better? Not so much research the thing for me, but can I make this a more effective argument? Can I take into account what the judge what their leanings might be? And can I just apply basic principles, classic principles of persuasion to the arguments I'm going to make? And can I use AI for that? And does it move the ball forward? And that's sort of where I'm at in looking at generative AI. And I think it's fascinating. I think it's a first draft tool. But in some cases, the results are amazing and they're fast. And if I do brainstorming and I have no ideas, or I have 2 ideas, I can have generative AI. I can have ChatGPT generate hundreds of ideas in a few minutes. And if I end up with 1 or 2 good ideas I want to move forward with, that's an amazing result.
There's so many fascinating things in that, and I encourage our audience, once again, please do send in any questions that have been inspired by either of the speakers so far. And Dennis, before I move on to ask Ari a question, you were also working in-house for a while, and I wanted to get your perspective, putting your in-house hat on for a second, what the kind of immediate exciting applications are that you would have been delighted to have seen when you were in that position.
That's fascinating, because I was at MasterCard, and so I would say one thing that we were doing at the time, this won't surprise anybody, was we were looking at AI for fraud detection and other things like that. But in the law department, I think there are, everything from summaries to help me find an expert to talk to within the company. I look for very sort of smallish helpers. How can this really help me? Here are all the projects I'm working on. Can I use the AI to help me determine priorities? Can I identify, what might be in danger of slipping past the deadline? Can I use it for those things that would be really helpful to me? So it may not surprise you, but every week when I sit down and plan the next week, I actually use a mastermind group that I've created through ChatGPT prompting to help me say, what should be my priorities next week, and are they realistic, and how would I do that? And I just use that as a helpful thing. And then, as Jeremy pointed out, there's a point where it becomes obvious that you have to be the human who jumps back in the loop. And that's how I would have looked at this, if I were still in-house, is what are the very specific things that can help me on a day-to-day basis, and to move toward, and this is again some sort of my variation on something that Jeremy said, but phrase that's used a lot in the US these days is, how can I start to practice more at the top of my license?
So Ari, kind of, feeding off of those prompts, would you agree from your research, is those the sorts of use cases that in-house teams are getting most excited about? And are you seeing many examples where those are actually being applied?
No. I want to go back to something that Jeremy said for a second, because I read a law review article by one of his partners, Al Lindsay in Miami, who's a stellar litigator, and had been talking about using AI for years at the most sophisticated levels, and it really highlighted the direction from which we've come. So in the early days, and Jeremy mentioned that it's been used for a very long time, it was used in ways, and I know Dennis has written about this as well, it's been used in ways to categorize data, to identify nuances in data. It wasn't really used to actually generate material that would serve as a pretty good draft of something. And I think that's been a huge shift. But I want to just level set here, because like you, Mary, I've interviewed hundreds of folks over the past year, lawyers, obviously throughout the US, because that's where I'm based, but in Australia, Brazil, Canada, Colombia, Germany, Israel, like, just all over the world. I have a new general counsel report coming out. And I think everyone needs to realize that most of our profession globally is still figuring this out. Jeremy's given a great example of something that shows the distinction between where a regulation is and where a regulation is headed. That seems like a logical use of this, but to the extent of deploying it in the most sophisticated way, people are really still struggling with security, with trust, and other kinds of use cases. So I can't see sort of the list of people who's listening at this point, and I certainly won't know who's going to listen to it afterward, but everyone should just sort of recognize that we are all still figuring this out. But from the perspective of the lawyers that I have spoken to, and those lawyers include leaders in-house and leaders in law firms, there's a very practical element, and Dennis mentioned this just in terms of coming up with a draft, but the most common way that people seem to be using this in corporations is in some respect trying to use it to address contracts. They may be basic contracts, they may be NDAs, they're relying on their CLM systems to incorporate some of this technology, certainly summarizing news. Jeremy talked about this just in terms of maybe a client alert, but just quick summary where it's pretty safe to get it to summarize a piece of news that's coming up, creating a draft, responding to an email. Sometimes you may see this in your correspondence at this point. It seems a little formal. Maybe you can adjust the tone with your prompting. Job descriptions, increasingly common in law departments, agreement templates, maybe contracts. Some even talked about drafting patents. There's a certain standard, anything that has this kind of standard, and also security questionnaires. If there is a sort of existing amount of information on which this particular technology can rely and draw from, that is a very efficient use, especially because people just don't really like that kind of effort. And if you can get a technology to do it, that'd be great. But I think it's important for people to recognize that there are limited use cases in general. Some sophisticated examples you'll see in the media and you'll sort of hear about on programs like this. But for the most part, everyone is still trying to figure out what direction to take, what's secure, what are clients comfortable with. And clients are relying on their outside counsel to help them make these decisions.
So is your impression that this is more of a preparation stage? And if so, what does preparation look like?
The legal industry has been using AI for over a decade. I mean, if anybody who's paid attention to e-discovery knows that this is sort of well-trodden, and the courts have had decisions on it. It's an accepted use. And so this is just like a sort of a new element of it. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that it will replace certain tasks, certain jobs. Everyone always talks about this being an augmenting solution and that it makes a lawyer more bionic. But when Jeremy highlights that he took something from 50 hours to 2, that is clearly replacing somebody doing something. And what's most important is that people recognize that this is changing, and it's changing rapidly. We went from GPT-3 to GPT-4 and then Turbo. Like, this thing is coming out rapidly, rapid fire, and people really need to recognize that things are being replaced. What can I do that will be unique to my skill set? What can I start to learn? Where can I position myself? I think it's much more important for people to be thinking about that than worrying, because that's sort of just wasted time. There's tremendous opportunity. There's huge promise here, and the people who are being creative and thinking about it. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about some other topics in terms of education, but there are areas that seem to be really sort of likely for those who really want to gain an advantage.
Mm. And definitely we will come back to that because it's such a fascinating point. But quickly, just around this sort of issue of practical application, I asked Jeremy the burning question of, what is the actual technology that they were using? What are the big apps that you are seeing make progress out in the industry at the moment? Do you think that Copilot is the thing that is going to be most transformative for the people that you've spoken to, or are there other, technologies that have been more effective so far in making inroads?
I don't think it's a mystery that Copilot is going to be the quickest to gain acceptance because of the penetration of the Microsoft suite, but people are slowly adopting other tools and waiting to see. Again, I think the expectation in terms of my research has been our existing technology providers are going to be incorporating new generative tools into the application we already have, either as an upgrade or as a value add, and that's where we will be using it, as opposed to the people who talk about creating their own large language model, or I think that this is much more of we can use it through something we're already comfortable with, rather than dramatically revolutionize our tech stack.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's clear from everything you're saying that this is certainly disruptive. And I think there's a consensus amongst us that this is a significant step forward in terms of technological change that the industry can't sort of stick its head in the sand over. That's certainly what we found in our research, is that with so many technologies, lawyers have been very reticent to get involved and very skeptical, but this seems to be one where a lot of people are embracing it and getting on that journey, however slowly. And so I want to get onto this subject of how it's going to transform the legal industry. I think, Jeremy, I might come to you first, because from what Ari's saying, you've clearly had a lot of success in being first movers in this and getting stuff out into the market. So what would you say are the kind of key ways that law firms can carve out a competitive advantage in this, which could be seen as an existential threat to the law firm model?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, this could come from so many different angles. Right now, the big law business model is at existential threat, like you said, and it's been like this before artificial intelligence was there. This is coming from alternative forms of delivery of legal services, ALSPs, in the last 5 to 10 years. Ari, you probably know the numbers better than I do. It's built into a $1 billion industry. Now you see Big Four getting into the game. EY has EY Law that they're trying to split off altogether. Armies of lawyers that they have that can come in and do those legal adjacent services. If you don't need somebody underprivileged from Hogan Lovells at $1,700 an hour to be doing contract review or policies or tabletop exercises for cyber breach, you can go hire EY Law or United Lex or Elevate at a fraction.
Although, can I just compliment Jeremy and his team, because law firms, anybody who's going to count out a successful law firm is probably misguided, because law firms have figured this out and created their own captive ALSPs within their organizations to provide exactly the kind of expertise that their clients trust them for. And if they can do it at the same caliber and in the same price point, they're going to have an advantage.
Absolutely. And that's how you keep ahead of the game, right? There's some law firms not doing this. Hogan Lovells has built out alternative delivery stations. We have one here in São Paulo, Brazil. Brazilian lawyers are great. They're highly educated. They're fluent in English, Portuguese, and Spanish. São Paulo is one of the biggest legal markets in the world for creating new lawyers. They come at a fraction of the cost of an American lawyer or a UK lawyer. We built an alternative delivery center here. We're tech enabling it. We're trying to keep ahead of this. But, AI is one of those areas that will change two areas, right? The practice of law. How are you actually delivering legal services to the client? More importantly, the business of law. The business of law is under a complete attack right now from the client side. The rise of legal operations, especially in America, clock has really taken off, and that has permeated outside of the United States to multinational corporations doing business that are headquartered overseas. Clock just launched in Brazil here. There's a heavy focus on how do we control outside counsel legal spend? How do we make them do better? And these clients, they're holding the purse string. They're asking for artificial intelligence or tech-enabled solutions or alternative delivery or right sourcing of talent at the right cost, at the right place to deliver the right product. You don't necessarily need a top caliber lawyer in New York City or Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles supporting you. Sometimes you just need good talent at the right cost, delivering quality products with tech-enabled solutions. So a lot of ways that we can get around this is being a little more creative thinking in big law. And I'm really coming from a big law perspective here, not in-house counsel, not academia, and not service provider or legal tech company. But there's an entire ecosystem that is on the verge of changing. As Ari put it, some people have lost their jobs to this point. This is just like every evolutionary leap forward. It's when we went from horse and carriage to the automobile. And that happened very quickly, right? A lot of people who stabled horses and shoed them and fed them and built those carriages, their jobs went out of business real quick. But then people who built carburetors and tires and rubber companies and axles, individuals had to retool themselves professionally to come into new jobs that didn't exist before. That's about to happen in the legal industry as well. Dennis talked a lot about how to prompt engineer. This is a huge area that I'm trying to find talent in, because a lot of lawyers just want to get on ChatGPT, type in a question, get a bad answer out. And they don't understand the mechanics of how to make a good prompt, how to lead the machine into a position to then get the quality results that you want out of it. And that's both an art and a science. Now, if you're looking to retool your skill set, I think that's one of the biggest areas to start learning immediately to add value to your legal team or in-house counsel, wherever you work. That'll give you an accelerated change in your career.
It's a fascinating point. Ari, from what you've been saying, we are quite a long way off this, but it seems to me that we could be reaching a point where law firms are just going to stop getting the call from in-house teams, because there's going to be certain types of work that can just be done in-house without picking up the phone. And perhaps there will be some quite significant structural changes taking place in legal teams. And I'm curious to know what you think that might look like, and also what you would advise to law firms and legal service providers about how they can be prepared for that and how they can be prepared to respond to that change happening.
So I've been doing research on these topics for 15 years, and this is like a pendulum that keeps shifting in terms of how much work is going in-house, how much work is being handled by a law firm. And yes, there should be work that an in-house team is capable of doing, but the volume of work just continues to increase. The complexity of the data, the level of risk that organizations are dealing with, the amounts in controversy have continued to grow. And so there needs to be this risk sharing. So there's always going to be this relationship. Jeremy talked about the idea of a alternative legal service provider. We used to have kind of this sort of linear relationship between the law firm and their clients, but now there's this sort of multi-pronged relationship with the law firm, a client, and maybe some other kind of a provider. At this point, it could be technology, it could be services, and so there's no question that law departments, as they become more streamlined, will continue to use and rely on their outside counsel. It's going to be up to outside counsel. And I'm imagining there are a lot of law firms, leaders in law firms, practitioners from law firms who are listening. It's really their responsibility to provide the highest value, to distinguish what they can offer versus what the organization can do, to empower the law department to do as much as they possibly can within their organization. I think Jeremy's example is a great one, and just in terms of, you don't need us to know at the base level how the regulation has changed. We're happy to share that with you. We provide a premium kind of service. We're happy to give that to you. Should you need something additional, and in terms of an analysis, well then, let's have a conversation. And you're starting to see this. Jeremy mentioned Clock. Over the summer at the ILTA conference this year, I was very lucky to moderate a series of discussions as a collaboration between Clock and ILTA, typically representing the corporate side and the law firm side, in a discussion about how are we developing a profession that's changing into a much more tech-centric profession. And that is a conversation that really needs to be had. So as the law continues to evolve, lawyers, legal professionals really need to recognize, whether they're in law firms or corporations, that technology is becoming a fundamental part. Knowing exactly what's happening. I mean, there have been discussions about this prompt engineering and how valuable it is. At this moment, yes, valuable. At some point, it will become the way I practiced law for nearly 9 years, between 1997 and 2006. And so when you were searching for a case, you needed to use Boolean connectors, and you really needed to understand the nuances of how legal research was conducted. You don't need that anymore. At some point, I realized I could just call them and they could do the search for me, or it became a natural language and it was much easier. And so prompt engineering, it seems like, may go in that direction. But for now, it's critically important from tone, work product, result, et cetera.
I feel that I'm becoming a bit of a chicken little in this conversation. But Dennis, I want to return to a sentence that you said earlier, which was about generative AI, being something that helps you as a lawyer and helping you to practice at the top of your game. But of course, the counter argument to this is that perhaps it just replaces the lawyer, and that it's really a kind of defense mechanism from lawyers to say, oh, we'll always be needed. We're essential. We're a special profession. Others might be replaced, but we won't. Would you dispute that? Or, to what extent do you think lawyers do need to be prepared that they might actually be replaced by a machine?
Well, lawyers are great at, defending their profession, right? And so you said something earlier about, well, the legal profession and lawyers can't ignore this AI because it's, had such an impact. I'm going to look back in history. Like, lawyers are great at ignoring new technology that would really, really help them. So I'm not as concerned. I think that in a lot of things, I tell my students when I'm talking about AI, is the thing about AI is it forces you back to root issues. So you'd say, oh, I have this fear that AI is going to replace lawyers. And then you would say, okay, well, what does that mean? What is it that lawyers do? What do lawyers need to do? What is the practice of law? What has to be done by a lawyer? And is it starting to change to something where the only thing you really need a law degree for is to try cases in courts? Because a lot of other people can do a lot of other things and do them very well. And, so the AI, the fact that the AI exists is, I think raises that question. What I've seen that I find really interesting is what I call the Chat GPT or the GPT-4 problem. Okay, so gigantic increase in what AI can do, going from 3.5 to 4. Okay, you can use Chat GPT-4 for $20 a month. Most people won't pay the $20 a month. It's like the biggest bargain in technology right now. I've heard people say, oh, there's, Microsoft Copilot. I think I'm going to be interested in that, but it's going to cost $30 a month per person. $30. Can you believe that? And so I think that there's this kind of, that's the negative I see. I think that's also the opportunity I see, and it's part of the challenge. So when in my current class, I asked students how many were using GPT now, and it's increased dramatically since the beginning of the semester. And they all use the free version, right? So to me, they're going to be disappointed. And a lot of people I hear are disappointed with generative AI are using the older versions. And I'm like, if you aren't using GPT-4 or the equivalent generation, like you're going to be disappointed. And so I think until you get to understand that, and you talked about preparation, I would say we're in a time of experimentation. And so what's going to happen is you're going to see people like Jeremy, especially. These are experiments, right? It's scientific method. Like we have this idea, we're going to run some experiments, we're going to get results, we're going to modify what we're doing, we're going to make it better. And that's how I see where generative AI is. If you say, I'm taking a look at it, and I use the free version, right? Crazy, right? They're lawyers to make tons of money. And then I'm unhappy with the results because I asked one question, that if I understood how the AI even work, I would say there's virtually no chance it's going to give me something useful. Versus say I use it in a very structured way that I've learned from experimenting, I think that has benefit. But to go back to this replacement thing, I think there is this augmentation. And if you, so I'll use the chess example. So if you ask people these days, who's the best chess player in the world? Is it a human or is it an AI? It's neither. It's a human using AI or possibly an AI using a human to assist it. And so I think in law, we'll start to move to that thing to say, here's a tool that could be useful if we understand how it could be useful. And then as we start to look at the system, so in the US, it's called access to justice, but can we use these AIs where lawyers have made it difficult, super expensive, very cumbersome for just regular people with regular legal issues, family law, those kinds of things. We just made it too hard and expensive. So people are doing it on their own. Can the system itself figure out ways to use AI? So I think that it's going to come back to like, what does it mean to be a lawyer? And what are we protecting there versus what is it that we're trying to deliver to people, and how can AI help us? Because it can be good at both things. I think AI could be like tremendous at helping lawyers, kind of dig the moat deeper and make it harder for people to come in. But I don't think that's the best use of AI.
Absolutely. And
Mary, can I just add something? I just wanted to say that I think that we need to ask the question more of like, will this happen? And really try to focus in on who it will most affect. And Dennis mentioned this idea of lawyers being capable of ignoring technology, and that's absolutely true, especially if you're an experienced, seasoned practitioner that is relied upon by your clients for your judgment and your expertise. But when I graduated law school in 1987, there were a few things that I was asked to do and that most of my peers were asked to do, which was review documents, identify clauses in contracts, for example, that meant something, and maybe draft basic pleadings or responses to certain pleadings. A machine does all of those things way better than someone with no experience now. And so you have this generation that is growing up into a profession that doesn't need them for the early years of training. And everyone always talks about how valuable it is to have a third, fourth, fifth, some kind of mid-level lawyer at their firm. It's not as easy to get to the mid-level anymore because those early formative years are a challenge. And then we can add in the pandemic where a lot of these folks were working remotely for the last 2 or 3 years. And that is also a challenge. So you have this double whammy of people coming back into the office and then having this technology that is generating content that they would have otherwise done. I should add in also some marketing activities. So, Jeremy talked about this client alert or some sort of summary. A junior person would have been asked to do that too, which would have really helped their skills to understand what was changing, what the law said. None of that is necessary for that person to do now. And so generationally, this is having a big impact. And while law firms can, yes, avoid applying it in certain instances for the people who are generating the highest billings and who are charging the most. But the future of the profession will really be impacted because it's directly implicating the junior folks and what that looks like in terms of their career trajectory.
Well, and when you talk about in-house, then, and we talk about the junior lawyers, I sort of question like why I'm paying a new associate to do something where they're potentially, well, they're certainly charging more hours than more per hour than I'm making, as in-house. And then I start to look at that and go, well, that's actually kind of flawed system, because one of the things I routinely do with prompting now is I have this thing I call the expert prompt, which just says, assume you're an experienced expert in this topic with knowledge of the, all the best works on it and have been trained by experts in the field. And now consider these things, or say, you assume you're a world-class expert in this. And so if I can generate something, again, first draft, right? If I can generate something from that says, why do I want like a second or third year level associate? Why don't I try to have ChatGPT try to duplicate what a partner might be thinking, or what a real expert in this might be doing, and use that as my starting point? Then that becomes really interesting. And then I think in-house, you start to say, well, what is it that to go back to that point, what is it that I want to pay for or to use outside counsel for? So right now, if Jeremy's firm were my outside firm, what I would want from them desperately was their knowledge and their experience of evaluating AI and what they were learning and how they could transfer some of that knowledge to me. I would pay a lot for that rather than try to learn it on my own. And then I would say that for me in-house, I was like, I want to keep the best work for myself. And so the most creative, the most fun. I don't want to use outside counsel for cross-departmental work because it's important that the in-house lawyer become involved in that. And you say, well, then look at things where you say, I have this deadline that's unreasonable and I don't want to work this weekend, but I can call my outside firm and they'll throw bodies at it and they'll do it. And then I can hand it over to somebody on Monday morning and that's totally worth it for me. And then the company stuff, where I would say, yes, we're buying the legal expertise, but we're also buying this form of, job safety insurance, where we say, hey, even if it didn't work the way we wanted or we lost the case, we hired the best firm we could, so don't blame me. And so I think that sort of personal dynamic is what you need to think about. And then one last thought is that I've written, and you can find this probably in a number of places, what I call the greatest disconnect in law, which is that inside counsel say, we want our outside counsel to do these things and talk to us about this, but we're sort of afraid to talk to them because they'll think we're really dumb or they'll charge us for it. The outside counsel say, we would love to, talk to our in-house counsel about trying these new things and new technologies and stuff and helping them do it. But we're afraid that they'll think it's just another way to charge us more money, or that they'll think we're not very smart or whatever. And I'm like, just have the conversation. And especially around AI, this is a place where you need to experiment together and learn together.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jeremy, I'd like to come to you at this point, because in some ways it seems that your team has been a great experiment in trying to bring some cognitive diversity in to sort of solve that contradiction that exists. And I'm particularly curious to understand what you think is necessary in order to bring the right skills into a law firm environment, given the kind of historical cultural barriers that have meant anyone who hasn't come through the traditional law school training contract, training mentality is somehow of less value to the organization.
Yeah, so this is a very real challenge. What we've been successful in is creating multidisciplinary legal teams. And this is a concept that is very hard to get over, right? Especially in law firms. If you're not a partner track lawyer, sometimes you're looked down upon, even if you're a practicing lawyer as a staff attorney or an e-discovery attorney or KM or legal project management or e-discovery. What the culture at Hogan Lovells has really enabled the ability for people who are not lawyers to come in and get a seat at the table and work with legal team and solve specific problems, whether it's strategic pricing, whether it's legal project management, whether it's tech-enabled solutions. What we've done is we've had very successful legal teams bring in individuals who are very highly skilled, legal adjacent, focused on coming in and working with those lawyers who have a very targeted intellectual legal strategy that they need solutions for. And they're not the best solution architect, but if you can come in, deliver solutions, like I said in the very beginning, build trust with them, show them how you can add value to that legal team. That moment that I had the partner here in Sao Paulo understand that, hey, this is how the machine learning is working. And it comes up with something that was very real to her on the Kaloi. I had her for the rest of my time at Hogan Lovells. Every time she has a project now, she brings me and my team in because she knows the creative insights that we can bring. But it's all about building the trust with the legal team, coming with a different perspective, and getting them to use you as a multidisciplinary team member. So this is one of the key areas of how the legal team of the future is going forward. And it's similar, Dennis brought up a good point as well, that working with clients the same way. Usually it has been partner to general counsel, right? That has been the relationship. How do you get more sticky as a law firm to come in and have conversations that are sparked with, hey, how do we work together on this? There's different entry points. The CTO is a great example. Going in and working with the head of compliance. I've been doing a lot of work with chief information security officers and chief data protection officers. Those guys want to have this conversation, right? And they need legal advice from either their general counsel or their outside counsel, right? But they have to go to outside counsel. They have to go through their GC. If I can make the connection with CISOs or DPOs and come in and show them what we're doing, how we can put safeguards around how they're using generative AI, or just safeguards because generative AI is coming up and there's people at the corporation that are jumping on ChatGPT and throwing in all their intellectual property into it, then they want to have those conversations. And I can go back to my partners who hold those relationships, say, hey, we have a whole new avenue here to make us more sticky with the client, how we can start bringing in alternative delivery, machine learning, legal technology. We're actually expanding your reach into the client to provide better services, faster, cheaper. If we can automate a lot of their stuff, that's taking it away from other law firms. That'll give more legal spend that we can use for Hogan Lovells. As Dennis said, the nights and the weekends, they'll be throwing at the associates to get stuff done. That type of work that I want to capture for them.
Mary, can I just add something that Jeremy is absolutely right. In fact, for the people who are listening, there is a tremendous opportunity to gain a competitive advantage by inviting some of these folks. And in fact, there's an expectation in a number of instances of these individuals with certain skill sets coming to that meeting. And they're not really limited to technologists. So obviously a data scientist, a knowledge management leader, a project management specialist, but even pricing professionals can bring real gravitas to a meeting. And in fact, the cost, there's no real cost. You're not billing for in some instances for some of this expertise. In fact, I think firms will probably just include it as a value add, but these people may not even be fundamentally billing professionals. And so every time I'm in a conversation, particularly if I'm moderating, I speak at a number of law departments and I'll have conversations with law firm leaders, and they'll always say, I would love to have the head of innovation or someone on the innovation team at the meeting. And to really understand the most creative way that you can deploy resources in the current climate. And also to Dennis's point, those folks, whether that person is a paralegal or that person is the head of pricing, they tend to have a certain granular expertise that can then educate the in-house team, again, as another way for the firm to offer value. And it's really appreciated, and the firm just gets a better sort of experience. There's an experience in terms of the perception of this firm thinking much more broadly about the legal matter as a business matter, because the law department is increasingly just a business unit that is trying to address a problem for the enterprise.
It's a really excellent point. And there's actually a question that's come in for you, Ari, that's relevant to this about whether the Big Four has a competitive advantage in this space. And I think it applies here because, arguably in that organization, in those organizations, there's less of a sense of, it can only be the lawyer partner who is managing that relationship because they work in a more multidisciplinary environment. Do you think that other organizations outside of the law firm structure will have an advantage because they don't necessarily have the cultural baggage that comes with the sort of historical way law firms have worked?
I'll take the first pass at this.
Ari,
I'll hand it off to you a lot here. They come with different cultural baggage. Big Four are very siloed fiefdoms. And, at the end of the day, they're accounting firms. When it comes down to it, if it comes down to a conflict of interest conversation, the accountants always win. That's their main business. Similar to like a legal tech alongside a law firm, I'm here to do the top line legal work for the law firm. And so the legal tech would not win out. There's going to be cultural issues there as well. Ari?
I think that the Big Four's competitive advantage differs depending on the jurisdiction in which we're talking about them. I also think that law firms have gotten much savvier about bringing in sophisticated chief operating officers and business leaders that rival. In fact, sometimes that talent is coming from the Big Four. And while those organizations tend to be, just incredibly, Jeremy works at one of the largest law firms in the whole world with a global footprint and still wouldn't compare to one of the Big Four, just given their size and breadth. And yet they have not quite been able to crack that, to solve that problem of how to take over. And I think it's a jurisdictional thing. I think it also, law firms are becoming much savvier about trying to address that competition. So the question is still an open one.
Yeah. So I think there's a practical question as well here for leaders who might be listening either from law firms or, running other kinds of organizations about whether the solution to all this is to try and hire different people or to change the way they train people and to upskill who they've got and perhaps look at, changing the way that the legal education system works. So Dennis, perhaps coming to you first, what changes do you think need to happen in the way that lawyers and professionals working in law are trained? And do you think that it's a case of just bringing in different types of professionals, or do you think that lawyers can learn to be good at this stuff?
Well, I think I'm always going to go back to experimentation. So this is a time we have to try a lot of things. So we're in a time of systems that aren't working very well. And we're trying to apply little point solutions here and there and being surprised that we can't predict what the results would be. So there are lessons that we should have learned over the last 3-4 years from COVID that we haven't really, we're in the process of forgetting. There are other things like that. So when I look at education, I'm saying, well, we just have to try a lot of different things and not like rush back to the way things were. So what I'm doing at the Center for Law, Technology, and Innovation at Michigan State, one of my primary goals is I've created something called the New Legal Careers Platform. And so all the things that Jeremy was talking about, that Ari was talking about, this is where the opportunities are for really bright young students who don't want to do traditional practice. So they can do legal tech, they can do project management, they can do business of law, they can do all the AI stuff is going to come out of there. And so that's what I'm trying to drive forward with that. I'm also trying to teach a number of classes that give students a framework for how to deal with new technologies. The trick here is that we can pretend this is not the case, but all these new technologies, AI, data privacy, all this stuff are areas where there are no answers. There are no clear answers. And so it's a different type of legal skill that's needed for that. And then we're increasingly global. And if we're going to go back to the past and say we're just going to train lawyers to do family law and basic litigation when that's not the work they're going to do, I don't think that makes sense. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it that I've been talking with leadership at Michigan State College of Law recently is, can we bring people back, practicing lawyers back, to get up to speed on these very targeted areas? So if you think about it, in the business schools do these like short-term, say like 6-week kind of weekend executive MBA things that are very focused. The law schools or other legal education providers do the same thing. And can we so we're trying to train people, how do they think in different ways? What are the new skills that are needed? Can we bring those things? And if people realize they have to change and reskill, can we create the opportunities for them to do that? And then are the firms, are the employers willing to pay for people to be reskilled? Which I think is a big question. There's other questions out there. So if Jeremy has created this amazing tool and all his firm does is say, here's an extra, 5% bonus this year, even though you brought in like millions of dollars to the firm, is Jeremy going to stay there? So what are the incentive structures and compensation structures? We look at all of that. And I think the Big Four tends to be better about those things, maybe. But we're also seeing that with the Big Four, especially on strategic planning, consulting, and like the McKinseys of the world, people are using ChatGPT already to generate reports and plans exactly of that type. So I think there is this notion that, AI is going to help at the very low end, the commodity end, all that sort of things, which it will. But I also think there's really fascinating opportunities at the high end. And that may be what the big global clients are willing to pay their law firms for, is using AI in that context. Can you help me predict what's happening in the future? Given that we don't know where the regulations are going in this area, what are reasonable paths to take? There's the thing. Can you be more strategic for us? And then we might be willing to compensate our law firms in a percentage or other way that we would be more willing to compensate consulting and the Big Four and other firms for. So I think it's a really dynamic time. And I think that if we just keep cranking out lawyers the way we have, I think we're preparing people, saddling them in the US with gigantic debt, and then putting them into an employment climate where it's going to be very difficult to succeed, versus saying, can we do something that trains these people for where the new jobs, the new careers are, and where the fun and cool and creative work that I always liked as a lawyer is going to be.
Absolutely. So there's another question that's come in, and it's a slight change in direction, but I think it's worth briefly touching on this topic about data, because obviously underlying these large language models is having a huge amount of data, and that's really the war that's going to go on, is between the different big players in the market at the moment who each have these huge pools of data. And then with law firms, is it going to be the enormous law firms, the Hogan, Lovellses, the Kirkland & Ellis's of the world, who have a bigger pool of data to draw on, that will come out top? Or will it be the Big Four because they have more data? Or will it be some company that isn't currently a law firm that will enter the market? So Ari, perhaps coming to you first, what do you imagine this kind of data war is going to do to the market, and how should organizations be preparing and responding to that threat?
In the short term, people want to be culling through their own data. They want to know that the data that they are relying on is trusted, is secure, and they are starting to, the best thing that the people who are listening can do is to engage in a campaign of better data hygiene They clean their data, get rid of the stuff that's terrible, and really get people to have a better understanding. And the reason I bring that up is because it relates directly to the prior point. You asked three questions. You said, do we need to train better? Do we need to hire different kinds of people? Do we need to bring in new people? Yes to everything. And I think that what the missing point here is individual or organizational responsibility and being proactive. Any of us can learn as much as there is available out there about some of these things for almost nothing. It's virtually free, and all of the resources are there, and it's just a matter of us saying, do I do these LinkedIn learning courses on prompt engineering or generative AI, and it's just fascinating that people aren't taking more advantage. In my research, I'm sure in your research you've seen this, that a lot of individuals are just not proactively, they're waiting. My firm's not offering this. The company doesn't offer this. I think waiting is a big mistake. And I think it's the same issue for your data, to wait until a large language model is developed, to wait until the industry settles on something. I think that's the wrong approach. I think the approach is to be as proactive and as nimble and as dynamic as you can be, so that when whatever is available becomes accessible, you are light years ahead. The bar is low at this point. Take advantage of that and create an opportunity to be distinct.
That's really excellent advice. I'm going to ask Jeremy and Dennis each, what is your advice to the audience based off everything we've just been discussing?
Yeah, I'm going to jump off that last question as well. I don't think the arms race is who has the most data. Ari's absolutely right. It's who has the cleanest, most valuable data. Right now, these large language models are trained on so many parameters that even when I take it and I drop it on Hogan Lovells data, and I have good data that I want to train it a specific smoothing algorithm on, it does very little to move the needle at this point. What the most valuable thing, it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, Ari, Dennis, where data became the most expensive commodity in the world over oil. Now it's garbage in, garbage out. If you have bad data, you're going to get bad results out of a model. The hardest part of coming in and training a good, clean algorithm or a good, clean model is having good, clean labeled data on there, something that you can get a reliable output on with your input. And that is a huge amount of effort. So a good profession to go in is, hey, how do we come in, normalize this data, enrich it, find out where there's going to be enough parameters where you're going to have good amount of tails on those outsides, so you don't have outliers that are messing it up. You don't have bad data inputs causing hallucinations that you can't go in and dig in and find out where this is originating from. That's a huge area right now that it's extremely concerning to me. You have to be able to explain the data that's going in to explain the outcomes that are coming out. Going back to the talent question is the same thing. Ari said yes, which I categorically agree. We need to be training lawyers that are coming through law school to understand what the legal future is like. If you're going to be practicing law, you need to enable yourself with all the new methodologies that are coming up to practice law better. If you don't want to be a lawyer, but you want to be lawyer adjacent, but you want to go to law school, here's other areas that you should be interested in. You know what they don't teach in law school? Business. Big law firms are fabulous for getting associates, hammering them at 2,000 hours a year or more for years and years up until they become a partner. Now they're running a business, they're a partner in a business, and they have no clue about basic economics. Explaining to new partners what realization is, or leverage, and why it's important, or alternative fees, and how we can't just bill through the teeth and then write it off and write it down, or where the red line is for profitability. You can't go below a certain point when you're doing negotiations, right? Lawyers, they want to win projects at all costs. If they say, this investigation will cost $1 million, the client says, well, White and Case said, like, hold on, this project will cost $500,000. They went, well, can we get a hold on, $250,000. They have no idea where the red line is, where the law firm would be actually losing money, because nobody ever taught them economics coming up through. Technology, same thing. Basic skill sets. You think that the younger lawyers would be more sophisticated in using technology? They're not. It's similar to when I got my first car. I had no idea how a carburetor worked, but I knew if I hit the foot on the gas pedal, that car would go, right? Same thing. We need to be, a lot of my partners say, Jeremy, what type of AI can we bring in to the law firm to become the most efficient? I say it's not AI. To become the most efficient, we need to teach lawyers how to use Excel. That's it. Basic Excel. VLOOKUP, formulas, tables. That would give us the biggest efficiency gain on it. So training talent and clean data. I think that's where I would add on.
Great.
Dennis?
Yeah, I just want to, so a lot of AI right now, and this has always been true of legal tech, is a solution looking for a problem. And so if you can flip that and say, what problem would I like to, if ideally, what problem do I have and how might AI solve that? Now, I'm going to bring up something that will probably be one of the more radical things that I say on this, is when I look at data, and I look at it's historical, it's incredibly biased, it's messy, and I'm starting to wonder, this is a question I've been thinking about, is like, going larger the solution, is going smaller the solution, is using different forms of data and kind of aggregating across them? Is that going to be the most important thing? We have to experiment. And I sort of am coming to the point where I say it's what matters is the large language model. And so if the large language model produces really great outcomes for me, how much should I really care about the data? So is it really outcomes that are important, or is it input? And the only way we're going to find that out is to experiment. And I think that that's where the best work is happening, purely in experiment. And you asked earlier, like where you might go. Like if you should you jump in? I think yes, obviously. But for me, I'm looking at two things. One is running open source large language models locally, so I avoid uploading my own personal data somewhere. Thing you see a lot is what Jeremy talked about, where people are getting an enterprise version of Bing AI or Chat GPT, and then having some protection if you trust the big tech companies. Or the third thing, which I'm really looking forward to, is that of the big tech companies, the one I trust is Apple. So they're going their typical cautious way into generative AI. And when they come out with it, I think it's going to be amazing. And that's a place that I'm looking forward to experimenting with. Could be wrong, but those are my thinkings. But pretty soon I'm going to start with the local open source LLMs and just start to play with it and say, like, are these ethical? Were they ethically put together? Are they de-biased in some ways? And do they give me different results?
Fantastic. Thank you so much to all three speakers. I'm conscious we're overrunning now, so I think this is a great moment to wrap up with those calls to action for our audience. So in summary, I think that the takeaway here is certainly Ari's point about being proactive and absorbing these ideas that have been shared by our speakers. Definitely, find their podcasts and read their books, because I'm sure everyone has many more questions that haven't yet been answered by this sort of amorphous topic that we can continue to talk about into the next year or two. And I think that the good thing to take away from this is that we've just come through a pandemic, which was an extraordinary change for all of us. And we're on the other side of it, and we have changed. And the evidence of that is that we're sitting here today at a conference that allowed one person to be in London, another in Sao Paulo. We've got someone in New Jersey, someone in Michigan. It's a really amazing privilege to be able to bring in this cognitively diverse group of speakers and have this conversation for a global audience. And I hope it may continue long after. So thank you very much to all our speakers, and thank you to the Institute for hosting this conversation, and to all of the audience for joining us from all over the world. Thank you very much.
Welcome, Professor Jensch.
Thank you.
We've reached the end of the conference. Thank you for your attention. We'd like to know what you thought of today's session. Please complete a short questionnaire using the QR code shown in the image. The videos of this conference will be available at lisbonlawandtech.com.